What the fuck is up, you buttercups? It's your boy, Penny Skinnis, and welcome back to my personal spiral into madness as I review the doomed anime known as Uzumaki. Now, if you haven't seen part 1, we looked at the first 2 episodes, the first episode being completed before the animation studio was canned, and the second being a fucking disaster. My god, I still can't believe this made it into the show. If you haven't seen part 1, I'll link it in the description and in the cards. By the time this video comes out, the final 2 episodes will have aired, so we're going to go over those, as well as review the ending and compare it to the manga. Now let's get started on episode 3. We open at the hospital to our base protagonist, Kyrie, lying in bed. I will again be calling her Kiri to avoid sounding Canadian. After the incident in the lighthouse, she's recovering from the burn she received, escaping. Suichi tells Kiri of his mother almost learning that there's actually spirals in her ear, which would surely drive her mad again. The two notice a spiral of male mosquitoes outside, Suichi asserting it must be the curse. Kiri overhears that 10 more pregnant women have been admitted after suffering thousands of mosquito bites. And because the maternity ward is full, the nurses inform Kiri she'll be sharing a room with her pregnant cousin, Kiiko. She helps her cousin settle in, putting all her belongings in her bedside, including a strangely shaped heavy object wrapped in a towel. While we aren't too sure what's going on, we're set up to see some spooky shit, and after cutting back from the title card, we get a glimpse of Kiri's dad collecting clay from Dragonfly Pond, before cutting back to the hospital, where 3 patients have been found dead, covered in stab wounds and completely drained of blood. Suichi sees a mosquito in Kiri's room and sprays it with insecticide, explaining how only female mosquitoes carrying eggs suck blood. For spraying insect killer next to a Pergurginate woman, Suichi is promptly kicked out of the hospital, and that night, Kiri notes a mosquito flying around and tells Kiiko to be careful, which she responds to by saying she actually loves mosquitoes. Not weird at all. Later that same night, Kiri wakes up and finds all the pregnant women walking down the hall of the hospital carrying hand-cranked carpenter drills. They fan out into different rooms, and when Kiri follows one of them, she finds a Pergurginate woman drilling a hole in a dude's neck before drinking his blood. In my opinion, this episode adapts some of the creepiest chapters in the entirety of the manga. There's just something that's absolutely terrifying about pregnant women. There's just something really creepy about seeing these pregnant women all working together to murder people in this hospital by hand with drills, drinking their blood. It's creepy all around. And this is despite the drop in animation quality. In fact, throughout this episode, yeah, there's bad animation here and there, but it pales in comparison to the main issue with this episode, which we'll get to in a bit. Kiri is spotted by one of the pregnant women, but before she's attacked, another patient walks out and is swarmed by all of them. The women hypnotize him before murdering him as well, and they also get their hands on a nurse. Also, the guy they just killed, his hair changed color from black to white. Very nice. Just as the pregnant women have decided they've feasted enough, they remember Kiri and decide to kill her, since she's seen what they did. Just before she's attacked, she finds the bug spray that Suichi left behind and sprays it in the face of all the Pergurginate women, who leave her alone for the night. Elsewhere in the hospital, Suichi's mother is sleeping when a centipede tries to crawl its way into her ear. Understandably, she freaks the fuck out, but not as much as she does after it turns itself into a spiral shape and she sees her husband's face. Her husband says she should become part of the spiral with him, and that he wants to crawl into the spiral inside of her ear. We cut to morning. All the Pergurginate women look healthy, and Kiri is trying to frantically convince anyone of the events she had just witnessed, but no one believes her story. We then cut back to Suichi's mother, as she's frantically trying to reach her doctor's office to check the chart on the wall from the other day, but when she gets there, the chart is gone, and the doctor lies and said he removed it because it was outdated. In reality, Suichi told him ahead of time it could be a problem. When she's brought back to her room, her IV drip starts spiraling into a whirlpool. Her husband's face reappears, telling her about the spirals in her ear again. She freaks the fuck out and stabs herself in the ear, the injury of which causes her to die not much later. She is then cremated, and the smoke spirals in the sky before being sucked into Dragonfly Pond. Now you might be asking yourself, but Jojo, I thought it was established in episode 2 that they stopped cremations and started burying people again because of the smoke spirals. To which I would say, shut the fuck up, I was getting there, impatient little bitch. The show is only 4 episodes long, while the manga is 20 chapters. To adapt these chapters, they had to be intertwined together so the stories could happen quicker than they did in the manga. The problem is, they did a terrible job at this. Episode 1 covered chapters 1, 2, 3, and 8, while episode 2 covered chapters 5, 6, 7, part of 8, and 9. The problem is, we did not actually finish chapter 2 in episode 1, that being Suichi's mother dying and turning into smoke. That's why neither of the first 2 episodes could go over chapter 4, the firing effect, because Suichi's mother hasn't died yet. We are now stuck 11 minutes into episode 3 trying to finish it up. I said in part 1 this was one of my main gripes with the first 2 episodes I had to watch. They threw in 2 minutes of Snail Boy instead of just finishing up chapter 2 and maybe starting to touch on chapter 4. Now all this plot is doing in episode 3 is taking away from the tension of the pregnant lady arc. Not only that, but we've completely contradicted previously established lore in the adaptation. The only reason being, it was written poorly, and this plot with the kiln requires that both of Shuichi's parents be cremated, so their smoke goes into Dragonfly Pond. I feel like a 5th grader could have written this better. Off the top of my head, I think luckily this is the only contradiction we have with the writing. Outside of that, the story is definitely suffering from the writing that requires we fit this all in 4 episodes. I honestly feel like, despite animation problems, the pacing could have been a lot better if we had like 5 episodes. Because at the speed this show moves, it literally feels like we don't have time to be afraid of anything. But if we wrote this story better and wasted less time on chapter 2, 4 episodes would have still felt pretty okay. We might have even had more time to see the pregnant ladies start drinking bags of blood, because that's what they did after they got caught. Or the bombastic side-eye that Kiri got from one of the babies when she noticed its stomach was bulging. After a shot at Kiri's father, Mr. Goshima, working at his kiln, we cut to the hospital. All the babies have been born and Kiri's snacking on some hospital food. When she tries to spit out a mushroom, they didn't even bother animating it, but she was supposed to spit out a mushroom here, saying that it smells like blood. I'm gonna be 100% honest with you, I don't know exactly what blood smells like. I've never been in the presence of such quantity that I can recognize that smell, but yeah, Slay Queen. As they walk about the hospital, they overhear the staff absolutely nutting over these mushrooms, saying the obstetrician, that means Pergurginate doctor, said they were healthy, so everyone can eat as much as they want. It is also worth noting, all the people nutting over it tend to look middle-aged. They go to observe the newborns, which Kiri knows has been nurtured on the blood of humans. The babies sporadically just start talking to each other about how they can't wait to go back to the warm place, and how the doctor is putting one of the babies back right now, before their onesies pop open and a mushroom grows out from their belly buttons. The same spiral mushroom the hospital loves, and that Kiri almost ate earlier. She hears Kiko scream and goes to investigate, finding a room covered in the baby mushrooms. When asked about Kiko, the obstetrician starts talking about how babies' cuteness is a weapon to help them grow to maturity, but that these babies are different, and are so determined to get back into the womb that they keep regrowing the umbilical cord and placenta. That's right, that's a placenta mushroom head. Fucking appalling. Shuichi runs past the doctor and finds Kiri's cousin wearing Jojo brand nipple pasties. She's been cut open and her baby placed back inside her womb, then stitched back up. Jesus fucking Christ. Because she is now carrying the baby again, she needs more blood, and since Shuichi is not actually supposed to be here in the source material, he is thrown aside like a used condom, so the doctor can hold Kiri at vampire point. But Jojo, you might be asking, how is she going to drink any blood without her trusty bloodletting drill? Shut the fuck up. Stop interrupting. She's revealed to have a tongue like a mosquito's mouth, which she uses to stab the doctor instead of Kiri, and begins to drain his blood. Shuichi exists again all of a sudden, and they both get the fuck out of there, as nurses come in to eat the mushroom, and Kiko looks for more blood. And this is where the mosquito arc comes to an end. In the manga, this really felt like a turning point in the story, as everything begins to go to shit, and nothing, including mosquito vampire women, really matters anymore. But in the anime, we still need to finish chapter 4, which feels much more out of place since we're going straight from Pergurginate women sucking people's blood back to slice of life with a twist. If the stories were a chart, this is what it would generally look like from chapter to chapter. We are increasing the what the fuck meter and ramping higher and higher. This is what the anime's chart would look like. Going back to chapter 4 out of nowhere just kills the momentum entirely. While walking Kiri home from the hospital, her mother tells Shuichi they'll be having him over for dinner. Now this technically works, but in the manga, the context of him coming over for dinner is that both his parents are dead and he's been bed rotting and starving himself. That's why he looks all bony in the face. In the anime, he literally looks fine 2 seconds earlier, but then again, we're never really told how much time has passed between these black frames that show up to separate scenes. While eating, Shuichi sees the plate he has is covered in spirals and freaks out. Kiri's father begins to go on a spiral rant, saying Mr. Saito was a genius. And when inspecting some of his pottery, Kiri notices faces on him. Faces she says looks like Shuichi's parents. We see screaming spiral shapes as we cut to Mr. Goshima staring intently into the kiln. Shuichi says he can hear voices calling from inside, and after hearing his parents' voices begging for help, he picks up a brick and lobs it at the kiln. Because we have no animators, the brick explodes on impact, before before we cut to the insulator bricks sort of toppling over. Clay filled with spiral souls begins flying out of the kiln while Mr. Goshima and Shuichi escape the cottage before it is engulfed in exactly 3 fire PNGs. And just like yanking the final tooth root loose, we finally finished chapter 4, the effort of which has nearly given me a brain aneurysm. And now the real turning point for the anime can start, as we begin the adaptation of chapter 12, The Storm. We cut straight from the cottage fire to strong rain washing over the city. Mr. Goshima is repairing holes in the roof when Kiri tells him to come inside. Her umbrella is swept off by the wind, and as she looks up, she can visibly see the eye of the storm above her. Now this is very strange because most hurricane eyes are as wide as 40 meters, but she can physically see the eye because of how small it is, being at most a few blocks wide. We cut to Kiri's family listening to a news broadcast saying meteorologists have no idea why the storm has parked itself directly on top of the town and hasn't moved. The broadcaster is then cut off mid-explanation, literally like mid-sentence, and we cut to a news reporter in the storm and are finally, 19 minutes into episode 3, shown the fate of the spiral hair girl. She is dead with her hair wrapped around the pole, like in the manga, but for some reason most of her hair is no longer wrapped around the pole and is just sort of dangling there. We did not need this. This does not intertwine the stories. All it does is leave a disconnected plot thread that needed to be closed later with practically no context around it. In fact, this makes literally no sense. How much time has passed since this bitch died? Their teacher turned into a snail, which in universe had to have taken a couple of days. Kiri went and scaled the lighthouse. She then spent a while recovering in the hospital, witnessed pregnant ladies eating people, the babies born from these women shoved back in the womb, all before going home, eating these shitty looking noodles before the kiln cottage burns down. And you're telling me this bitch has been lying here dead for that entire time and no one did anything about it? No one thought to move her body that has to have been mummifying on the fucking power line for at least weeks. My god. No one at all makes any other note about the dead hair girl as we start hearing Kiri's name being whispered by someone. Her brother tells her the storm is looking for her. The doorbell rings and it's Shuichi who tells Kiri to come with him into the storm. He tells her she needs to leave or her house will be destroyed because the storm seems to be obsessed with her, whispering her name as the eye sits right atop their house. The storm uses a Naruto-esque almighty push to knock over some buildings onto Kiri, and when a woman who looks exactly like her tries to help, she is sucked into the eye in probably the goofiest looking animation of the entire episode. She is literally doing a little jig up there. The storm spits the lady back out and she splats on the ground. They deduce the storm must have grabbed the lady because it mistook her for Kiri as they hide beneath an overpass. After a log lightly brushes against this mirror sign, completely KOing it, their hiding spot is compromised. They see a storm drain and decide to go underground to escape, but are greeted by whirlpools that spin up and throw them into the air. The two are sucked into the eye and we get a shot of the storm swirling around Dragonfly Pond, then a shot of the two of them lying on the ground. That's right, we literally go from this to this in 3 seconds. God, I missed the animation of the first episode. It's revealed that all the houses surrounding the pond have been destroyed, including Kiri's. I want to make sure everyone understands the typhoon was sucked into the pond. The anime doesn't make that very clear because for some reason we do not get any voiceovers, and since we lack an animation team, we just kind of cut to the storm being gone. The storm sequence suffered horrendously from the animation quality, and even though all the pieces are in place for it to play out like it did in the manga, they just said, fuck it, it's an adaptation after all, and proceeded to take a massive shit on it. In the manga, the way this plays out is similar, but we start with Kiri and Shuichi on the beach as Shuichi recognizes the signs of a typhoon and proceeds to run through town like a freaking maniac, warning everybody. After learning the hurricane has stopped directly on the town, and Kiri losing her umbrella and seeing the eye of the storm, she hears it calling out her name at night, and the next morning she heads out to bring Shuichi his dinner, and that's why she's outside, in a raincoat. We also get this amazing panel of Shuichi posted the fuck up, asking her what the fuck she's doing outside. He heard the storm calling her name as well, and they both run for it. In the anime, Shuichi is the one who brings her outside and into danger, which makes no sense at all. He says her house will be destroyed if she doesn't leave, but her house was destroyed, and her entire family is fine. And the woman who gets sucked up in the manga doesn't actually look like Kiri. She's just a woman in a raincoat, which Kiri is also wearing. In the anime, Kiri was basically dragged outside, and this random woman who appears out of nowhere is also coatless. And I think I know why. Keyword: think. Remember, I'm just some dumbass on the internet making videos for entertainment purposes. Basically, what I think think is going on is that most of the characters in these scenes are traced 3D models. This would explain why no one got raincoats, because they're just using the same 3D model for multiple scenes and didn't want to deal with trying to get a raincoat on a model. Now this might seem like a small issue, but in reality it fucked up the entire way this chase plays out, because we aren't willing to animate a raincoat. Kiri is pulled into the storm by Shuichi, which makes no sense at all, and also means we don't get this bomb-ass frame of him posted the fuck up. Because of this lack of raincoat, we've now created a situation where Shuichi is actually putting Kiri in danger. Also, where the fuck are they even running? He took her away from the house, which is presumably where they were running to in the manga. So where the fuck are we going? I also have to note that this is the turning point where this show no longer can be considered horror, because the bad animation is so terrible, it takes away from any sense of dread and completely kills the entire vibe. Having read through the manga, it's just really sad to see what has come of this show, and I cannot imagine how Junji Ito must feel witnessing how they've massacred his boy. We cut to a shot of the row houses, which are the rundown poor people houses from episode 2, specifically the Twisted Souls lover plot. This is where Kiri's family must stay now, since the hurricane destroyed all the houses near Dragonfly Pond, including her family's. Shuichi is here too, I guess. I really don't understand why we're just making him here for things he wasn't a part of. Also, I have no idea what the fuck is going on with her dad's face, but it looks terrible. They all wonder why exactly the row house in its poor condition didn't seem to be affected by the typhoon, and we get a glance through a peephole where someone is staring creepily at Kiri. The family hears some strange moaning sounds before there's a knock at the door and a neighbor stops by. Mr. Wakabayashi. He looks fucking horrendous as he tells of the other neighbors, an old woman and her son who has some sort of disease that causes him to cry out in pain at night. He then just leaves. He only came by to give that tidbit because we don't have time for him to tell them in a natural way like in the manga. While trying to sleep, Kiri hears crying, not from the son but from the mother. She goes with Shuichi to check on them and finds the mother crying in the entry to the home, covered in either spiral warts or some other kind of skin growth. She says that her son is dead, and Kiri takes a look in the room before screaming. We cut to the son's body being removed by paramedics and the neighbor Wakabayashi asking Kiri what she saw. He said he peeked in the back window and saw tons of holes in the ground where the son would have slept. Like the base protagonist she is, Kiri is made quite uncomfortable by the situation and tells him to fuck off. We see that it was Mr. Wakabayashi spying on Kiri, having a perverted attraction to her. He looks down at his hands and sees he's covered in the same spiral growths as the mother and the son were. As the storm rages on, Kiri's brother points out weird spiral growths coming from the wall before it bursts open, revealing that Mr. Wakabayashi is covered in massive spiral horns, looking like a fell omen. After picking up the most sped rat I've ever seen, he gulps it down almost instantly and starts heading for Kiri. Stumbling outside, she's about to get nommed on before a pole flying through the storm nails the next door pervert right through the head, sending him flying away until the crossfade on his PNG is finished, and he vanishes into the night. It's just all so bad, but I promise you, it does not even compare to the next scene. The boys all tackle Kiri, I presume to keep her from flying away, before they notice someone in the distance bouncing. She immediately recognizes him as Mitsuru Yamaguchi, the kid who used to jump out and scare her before jumping in front of a car to prove his love to her. This is about the stupidest way you could mix the Jack-in-the-Box plot back into the story. In the manga, after Yamaguchi's funeral, Kiri opens his present, which turns out to be a Jack-in-the-Box. In the anime, the box just opens after he's run over and killed, never actually making it into Kiri's hands. But in the manga, the Jack-in-the-Box taunts her, saying it's her fault Yamaguchi was run over, and that he'll come back for her. Kiri and Shuichi then head to the graveyard to stake Yamaguchi's heart in hopes of preventing any undead shenanigans. This is when he springs out of his coffin and chases the pair through the graveyard, bouncing after them rather than running. His body is so rotten it falls apart more and more until his lower half has completely fallen off. As his body lays there, they believe the chase is over, before he pulls himself back up and begins chasing them again, somehow still bouncing towards them. As his body continues falling apart with each bounce, it's revealed he has a spring inside of him. He lunges at them one last time, and just as it looks like this will be the leap that reaches Kiri, he misses and splats dead on the ground, the spring bouncing free of his rotting carcass. Shuichi realizes that the spring was actually the suspension of the car that ran Yamaguchi over. When his body had to be cut out of the wheel well using a blowtorch, they left the spring inside of him, but now that it's fallen out and he lays in pieces, they are sure he'll never be back to haunt them again. Now, why did I just spoil the entire ending of this chapter for you before I show you the anime adaptation? Because the adaptation is so bad that I had to give you 50 cc's of solid horror before I hit you with this absolute abomination. I'm gonna do all of the tricks to try and not get copyright claimed because I need to show you the clip in its entirety. Before I do, I will note, fair use has nothing to do with the length of a clip. My showing the entirety of this clip to give context to the commentary I'm about to give on it falls completely under fair use. Now prepare yourself for the worst clip and the entirety of Uzumaki.
A spring sticking out of his body! I think that's from a suspension for a car.
I cannot describe to you in words the pain I felt watching this. It's so bad. It's not even funny anymore. It's just sad. I cannot imagine writing something as bomb-ass as Uzumaki just to witness it get absolutely shredded to pieces by production issues and for this to be the final outcome. The worst part is, the animation isn't even the only problem with this part. It's the fact this plot is just thrown in here, completely disconnected from any context. This corpse is able to hop around in the storm without being blown away, and he was able to hop all the way here without falling apart. How long has he been resurrected and hopping around? In the teaser, there was no storm when he popped out of the grave. This is the second storm. Does this mean he's been jumping around 2 storms without anyone noticing or him falling apart? They also adapted the very suspenseful "I think it's over" part of the scene into him just laying there for a couple seconds before getting up again. No actual jump scare at all. It's insane. Listen, I'm not a writer. I'm not gonna pretend I could write something as cool as Ito's source material, but I'd like to think I do have a few brain cells up there, and if I was asked to adapt his source material into something that could fit into 4 episodes, at this point in the show, I'm pretty confident I could manage that better than what we have here. I am a video editor. I spend all day taking 3 hours of raw footage and turning it into a digestible 8 to 14 minute video. My job is basically 60% adapting content, so I am dead certain I could adapt this manga better than what we ended up with. Who knows, maybe at the end of this video I will write my own adaptation. Trying to break any of this down is pretty rough. The pregnant women eating people is fucking insane and was caused by thousands of mosquito bites the women received. We're told how the male mosquitoes swarm in a spiral when looking for a mate, and at this point it's pretty clear that spirals are more than just a motif. They are actually a means through which the curse finds ways to affect the town. There is nothing inherently related between the previous plots and the pregnant women or the newborns, but the spiral nature that exists in mosquitoes was the means by which the curse found its way into the pregnant women. The umbilical cord of a baby also grows in a spiral shape, so the curse was able to find its hold in them as well, with everyone who chose to eat the mushrooms becoming obsessed with them. This can also bridge the gap I had in my first video between what looks like obsession as a main theme of the spirals and the snail story that didn't seem to have much in common with it. Snails naturally have spiral patterns on their shells, which is why snails are a way people can be affected by the curse. Kiri's hair was getting longer, and sometimes when hair gets longer it starts to curl at the ends, which could have been a naturally occurring spiral the curse was able to latch onto. All the other curses to this point involving obsession can easily be pinned into this as well, because we could describe obsession itself as an invisible spiral that affects the mind, which is why the curse shows up often when obsession is involved. When it comes to the firing effect, this part of the story is more about demonstrating something about the curse has to do with Dragonfly Pond, and ties into the same strange properties we went over in episode 1, that being bodies cremated in the town will cause spiral smoke that eventually settles into the pond, and those souls of the dead being found in the clay Mr. Goshima uses in his pottery. The typhoon itself is a spiral, so it makes sense why it would be used as a vector for the curse, and it also ties into the mystery of Dragonfly Pond, as each of the typhoons is being sucked into it as well, just like the smoke. The skin growths in the row house play out slightly differently. In the manga, the Goshima family also starts growing the spiral warts, and eventually leave the row house for a time, which made the warts go away. This spiral disease seems to be linked to the row house itself in the manga, but in the anime, only Mr. Wakabayashi is affected by them. This change isn't necessarily bad, as we can argue that in the anime, the reason the warts affected Wakabayashi is because of his perverted obsession with Kiri. There also isn't ever a solid explanation in the manga as to where they go while waiting for the warts to go away, and either way, they eventually end up back in the row house again with no spiral warts ever being an issue. We can call that an uncommon W for the writing team. As we finish up episode 3, we have covered 13 of the 20 chapters in Uzumaki. I've been saying there are 20 chapters because there are, but in reality there are only 19 that really need to be adapted, as chapter 20 is a lost chapter that appears to be either a cut idea that would have been earlier in the timeline or from a different timeline of events completely. This means we need to get through 6 entire chapters in episode 4, and I do not have high hopes. We start the final episode with a van driving through a tunnel. We get very clunky dialogue from the occupants explaining that no one's been able to contact anyone in Kurozucho since they were hit by the 3rd hurricane, and that there have been 6 storms total. As they exit the tunnel into town, a whirlwind forms behind the car, throwing it into the air and killing 2 of the 3 passengers, the only survivor being a reporter named Chi Maruyama. She goes to get help and finds the town is completely in ruins, with dead bodies littering the rubble of houses. She comes across Dragonfly Pond, now a perpetual whirlpool, before hearing sirens and seeing more whirlwinds headed her way. That's when she's found by Kiri and her younger brother, who tell her to hide. We are shown the whirlwinds are actually being rode by people known as the Butterfly Gang. Their name is a reference to the butterfly effect, which is the concept that small changes can have large consequences on complex systems. Like how a butterfly flapping its wings could be a small condition that leads to a tornado that might not have formed otherwise. It's believed by the town that the whirlwinds, which can form by any movement too sudden or sound too loud, are caused by the energy of the 6 typhoons that were sucked into the pond. That's why all the cars are flipped and why the van was hit by a whirlwind the moment they arrived. So to stay safe, they are stuck moving slow as a snail, as the brother puts it. An unfortunate choice of words. Kiri brings Maruyama to the row houses, which are the only places not affected by the whirlwinds. You can even talk normally inside. Everyone in the row house is generally irritable and reluctant to let anyone else in due to the limited space. Suichi is murmuring about spirals in the corner, which causes one man to get fed up and throw him out. They're all kicked out of the row house and are forced to find somewhere else to go. Maruyama wants them to try to find a way out, while the others explain there doesn't appear to be any way to leave the town, and Mr. Goshima says he just wants to rebuild his kiln and perfect his pottery so he can master the art of the spiral. The reporter screams as she comes across some snail people. Kiri notes how there are a lot more of them lately, as they smell something cooking in the distance. They find the Butterfly Gang cooking up and eating the snail people, and are offered some by the creepy leader, who tells the ladies they should join their gang so they can eat good all the time. We get more clunky dialogue about how the Butterfly Gang is actually now the Dragonfly Gang, before Kiri's dad steps in to defend the girls. He's sent flying in a whirlwind by their leader before Kiri shoves him away and into the air. The gang attacks the girls, sending them flying in a whirlwind headed closer to Dragonfly Pond, and they're only saved by Suichi, who's able to grab onto a telephone pole as the Dragonfly Gang is sucked into the whirlpool. The first quarter of this episode adapts chapters 14 and 15, Butterfly and Chaos respectively, but we miss out on an entire plot thread from Butterfly. Miss Maruyama finds 3 kids tied to wooden posts and gagged. She frees them, and they go on to destroy houses and try to blow her away with a whirlwind. She accidentally blows them away instead, and unknowingly kills one of them. That's when she meets Kiri, and we get the explanation of what's going on as they head to the row house. But 2 of those kids find their way back and start attacking it. The row house is shown to be unaffected by the attack, and the occupants band together to blow the kids away. But instead of the kids flying off and dying, they somehow manage to start riding the whirlwinds, as someone compares the way they wheel around to butterflies. This is the first instance of someone riding the whirlwinds, and in chapter 15, Chaos, we see this led to the creation of the tornado riding gang, as they make note of the kids being the first ones, showing it was possible. But they were never the Butterfly Gang, they were always just the Dragonfly Gang. I guess they just needed some other way to work in the butterfly effect dialogue. Not great writing here, but I guess it's passable. Chapter 15 is also when they discover the snail people and get kicked out of the row house, leading them to stumble onto the gang and her father getting blown away. One major difference from the anime is that in this chapter, someone in the rafters finds an old map in the plaster of the wall. It shows the town of Kurozucho, but instead of the town, it shows a giant spiral. There's plenty of bad animation here, but overall, a lot of it looks better than what we saw in episode 2, and mainly episode 3. I think out of all of these, episode 3 is probably the worst, because after the Jack-in-the-Box scene, there's really no topping how dog shit it was. The bar is so low that I'm almost surprised by how good some of this ended up looking. We cut to a large group of people making their way through the rubble. A whirlwind comes by and more people are swept off. The group stumbles upon Kiri, Suichi, and Maruyama and explain how they all got there. Their leader is Mr. Tanizaki, a volunteer who came to aid the town, but who's now trapped, as every road or tunnel out of town twists back on itself. They also tried making a raft, but upon seeing another group's raft completely swallowed by a whirlpool, they completely gave up on the idea. Kiri takes the group back to the collapsed roof her family's been using for shelter. Her mother's legs are broken and Kiri hasn't been able to find her dad. Tanizaki points out their shelter isn't very safe and that they should try and find a row house to stay in. One of their group also starts turning into a snail, and another has a spiral forming on his back. Suichi believes that the reason more people are turning into snails is because they're being forced to move so slow to prevent whirlwinds that the spiral curse is able to catch up to them. Tazanaki still thinks they need to get to a row house because while they don't know if it'll reverse the transformation, they know it's safer than being outside. When they reach one, they see people are already trying to convince the occupants to let them in. They're told there's no room and to leave, and some of the men try to force their way in. That's when 3 children pop their heads out of the door and try to blow them away. The group outside then grab a beam and charge the door, revealing the twisted bodies of the occupants inside. So many people kept sneaking into the row house that their bodies twisted together and now they can't untangle. The row house bursts open on either side, and as a mass of twisted bodies overflows, the exposed occupants try to cover themselves in scrap wood. As the group leaves, Tazanaki has the idea of extending the sides of the row house to make room for them to be safe inside, while some of the others would rather focus on escaping. This is when they see Navy ships approaching the town and are excited at the thought of finally being rescued, before the sea opens up in a whirlpool and swallows all the ships at once. Later that night, the group is low on food when one of the survivors finds some meat, which turns out to be a snail person left behind by the Dragonfly gang. The group eats it, some less reluctant than others. Some even make comments of how they can't wait to eat the other guy who's turning into a snail. Tazanaki says the girls should eat to keep up their strength, and that the snail people aren't even human anymore. It's implied that the two ate some snail meat, and in the morning, Kiri's group head back to her family shelter with some meat to give to her brother and mother. But when they arrive, the shelter is completely gone, and she finds her brother stuck under the rubble, saying a whirlwind blew their mom and the shelter away. When freeing her brother, they see he has a snail shell forming on his back, and Kiri believes she can save him if only they can get out of the town. Her plan is to try and go through the mountain trails instead of using the roads in hope of finding a way to escape. While headed out of town, they notice how the row houses are all centered around Dragonfly Pond, something that wasn't really apparent before every other building in the town was destroyed. They spot someone building onto the row house, setting off whirlwinds, and it turns out to be Mr. Tazanaki, who yells for them that there's no reason to run, sending a whirlwind right at the group. They continue heading out of town, passing the school, and heading into what looks like a much more twisted and spiraling forest than anything we've seen before. The group spots people heading towards them, and it turns out to be Takamoto and company, the ones who ate the snail meat with Tazanaki. They saw the group heading out of town and followed them, only for them to run into each other going opposite directions. So there's very obviously something keeping them from even leaving town through the mountains. They begin walking together until the man from earlier, who's already grown a shell, completely turns into a snail. The others are visibly excited and decide to eat him raw. Takamoto decides to crawl into his shell like some bugs do and eat him alive inside. While the scene is pretty fucking gross, it is quite underwhelming compared to what I remember in the manga due to the animation quality. While that group is busy fighting over the snail, Kiri and the others sneak away to continue trying to find a way out. Her brother is noticeably getting worse, and Suichi is starting to see his father's spiral body when they try to use a tree stump to tell which direction is north. And Maruyama's watch is all distorted as they feel time passing strangely. They run into Takamoto's group walking towards them again, and they seem onto the fact that Mitsuo looks to be turning into a snail. They try to obfuscate, saying it's just a backpack on his back, and Suichi begins carrying him, before his eyes pop out of his head, and he completely turns into a snail on Suichi's back. They begin speed walking away from the approaching crazy people, and upon reaching a cliff, Kiri tells Mitsuo to climb down it so he'll be safe, till she can come back for him. Reluctant at first, Kiri pokes him with a stick until he leaves. Then the three pretend they're still carrying him while being chased. Takamoto and the two others begin nutting at the thought of eating another snail, before their bodies completely twist and contort into spirals, and they fall on the ground. The group reaches an overlook and finds a massive spiral structure where Kurozucho used to be. They realize time must have passed faster while they were in the mountains, and that this could possibly be the original shape of the town, even showing us the image on the scroll found in the manga. Kiri decides she needs to go inside of the row house and find her parents, and Suichi wants to get to the center of the spiral in hopes of solving the mystery of its power. While walking the liminal rows, they run into a much older Tazanaki carrying spiral corpses corpses over his shoulder. He says it's been years since they left and that the residents are completing the row house from inside. Kiri asks about her parents, and Tazanaki said there was still a couple making pottery near Dragonfly Pond. The trio head inward as Tazanaki notes how he's never actually been anywhere near it due to all the debris stuck in the alleys. As night comes, they discuss the nature of the town's original spiral shape, wondering what its purpose could be. Suichi speculating that this could have happened over and over again through the centuries. But if it has, why is there no one left to remember? The next morning, they continue their way towards the center of the spiral. They see smoke spiraling in the sky above Dragonfly Pond and decide to quickly follow it. When making their way through an incomplete segment, Maruyama is blocked off by the twisted residents boarding up the walls. And as they complete the segment, they're shouting heard all throughout the spiral building that the entire thing is finally connected, before loud rumbling is heard from inside. When everything goes silent, they open the door and see that the entire spiral is empty, and follow it all the way to the center, where they don't find Dragonfly Pond, but instead find the smoke being sucked into the opening of a spiral staircase below where the center of the pond would have been. The two decide to brave the unknown together and begin walking down the stairs, but when passing a twisted body, it grabs Kiri's leg and bites her ankle. And as a struggle ensues, Suichi tries to help before he is wrapped up by the man and falls into the hole. This is by far the worst popsicle stick effect I've seen in the entire show, and I don't even know if I can use that term when it's literally a single PNG on both sides, falling with a blur effect. Like, this is the finale, a terrifying moment, and all I can think about is the falling birds from Invincible. Kiri continues running down the hole until she reaches the bottom, which opens to a large pit with a spiral, almost drill-shaped pillar in the middle. She tries to climb down and falls onto the pillar before her hands slip off of that as well, and she falls into the pit. When she wakes up an unspecified time later, she's surrounded by the twisted bodies of the occupants of Kurozucho and looks up to see a massive spiral monolith looming over her. There appears to be some sort of pulsing waves coming from whatever kind of ruins these are, and an almost blinding light accompanies it. She calls out to Suichi, and among the bodies she finds her parents, twisted together. Suichi calls back to Kiri, and upon reuniting, the two discuss the nature of the spiral monolith. Not knowing who or what built it, they know whatever it is, it's the source of the spiral curse that's been afflicting the town. Having some sort of will of its own, the monolith seems to be luring in the occupants after some predetermined amount of years, absorbing them into its spiral mass. Suichi doesn't think he can fight the curse anymore and is ready to lay down and give up, but tells Kiri she needs to keep going and find a way out. But Kiri tells Suichi she also doesn't have any energy left to fight it either, and that she'd rather stay with him. The two lock hands, which begin twisting together as they embrace for what could be the last time or for the rest of time below this spiral monolith. The ruins begin to rumble as the drill-shaped pillar spins its way back to the surface, locking into place and closing off the entry, as we hear Kiri narrate that the spiral curse on the town has finally come to an end as the credits roll. And then, there's a post-credit scene where we hear Kiri explain how the town crumbled to dust, and over time, a new one was created, as we get a scene that mirrors the first in the show. A woman with black hair and glasses gets off a train, meets her boyfriend at the train station, and they walk home as they discuss the idea of leaving the town, as whirlpools form in the water. Okay, that's actually the end. The ending in the manga and anime are practically identical, with the only difference being a few words, though the post-credit scene is an anime-only edition, and is meant to demonstrate that the cyclical idea of the curse is in fact true. By this point, there isn't much to break down of the curse, as chaos is the name of the game. We know by this point that the row houses had some sort of power connected to the curse, and that the people inside all turned into twisted spirals over time. And though it's shown by the snail eaters that you don't need to be in a row house to turn into a spiral, much like how Suichi and Kiri twisted together once they gave into the curse, the people who have chosen to stay in the row houses have practically accepted their fate and given up. I also believe the row houses are safe from the snail curse. They theorize that snails are becoming more common due to everyone needing to move slower, which enables them to be caught and transformed into a snail. The reason Kiri's brother becomes affected by the curse is probably due to him staying stationary at the shelter with his mother and getting stuck under the rubble when the shelter was blown away. And we can argue that the reason Tazanaki never turned into a snail is a combination of him continuing to move in the creation of the spiral row houses and the fact that the alleys of the row houses are also safe from the whirlpool whirlwind effects. So by that logic, he would also be safe from the snail curse. He could also be less affected by the curse in general since he isn't from Kurozucho. He's just an aid worker who got stuck there. Out of all the characters, Tazunaki is probably the only one who's canonically alive right now and able to escape Kurozucho. Because now that the spiral curse has run its course, people can now safely leave Kurozucho, but who else is there to leave? The only human left alive that we know of is him. We also don't have any explanation of what happens to the snail people, though I'd assume they are still snail people. But in terms of surviving the curse, we can put her brother on the list as well. He is a snail, but he's still alive. As for the source of the curse, we learn the spiral monolith is the cause of the curse, but we're never given an explanation of why. And I think we're better off for that. The fact we don't know what it is what makes it so terrifying. We do not know what the goal of this monolith is, who created it, why it's chosen this spot, or why it's represented by the spiral. It's just the horrifying reality they have to live in. Like a lone ant being stepped on by the boot of someone walking by. The people of this town are powerless to stop anything happening, and just have to exist through it till they don't exist anymore. My final review of the show is to give it a 1 out of 5. Most of that 1 coming from the fact I do actually commend them for finishing the show. Trying to think of what this show would look like at its peak if it had good animation quality all the way throughout. I still don't know if I would like it as an adaptation. As I pointed out throughout this video, there are a lot of issues with the writing. We're leaving out plot points just to throw them in later with no context. Episode 3 had terrible pacing, and one of the creepiest parts of the story is just ran over. I also didn't like how we just didn't use narration at all throughout most of this. Kiri steps in and starts narrating at the way end, but that would have been so useful earlier on to just explain stuff better, so I didn't have to. At its peak, if this show had maybe 5 episodes that were all 25 minutes long, that would probably be enough to adapt this better. We didn't get that, and we're not going to get that. What we have is this. Uzumaki. 4 episodes, 1 completed, 3 steaming piles of garbage, with subpar writing. Deep down, I can definitely see myself loving this show for how bad it is though. It is good because it is bad. Especially if you've read the source material, seeing what it turned into is just astonishing in a way. I'm almost shell-shocked by how bad some of it turned out. And with that, we've reached the end of my Uzumaki edutainment summary review. If you made it this far and still haven't seen part 1, I'll put a link in the description. And if you liked it, leave a like, subscribe for more, and have a good day.